When did your something is very wrong here feeling turn out to be true? Used to live on a farm on the outskirts of Tornado Alley. It's super disconcerting when the sky is really ominous and it's really windy, maybe gusting up to 40 to 50 miles per hour. Then at the drop of a hat, complete calm. That's your cue to get the F inside. Had a couple tornadoes close and several nasty windstorms that were nearly as bad as a tornado. The whole calm before the storm saying exists for a reason, and it's freaky. Buying plant in Cuba when I was 16. Super nice guy, one of the first people I'd met in Cuba. Had only been there 2 weeks. I asked him for a plant. He was like, oh my god, I sell the plant. He's like, I just got to pick it up from my house. I was like, no problem, you're a friend, this isn't weird. So we entered the house, but part of the sidewall is blown out into a doorway to connect all the houses on the street. I would say there's about 10. So we're walking through these houses. It's just old Cubans watching TV. We get to the last house. It's the only one that has a door. He tells me, okay, I'm just gonna get this stuff. You wait here. He enters. I hear him lock the door. I get the, oh, I'm about to get robbed feeling. I turn around. I see all the doorways we were passing now have doggy gates to prevent a quick getaway. So I bolt. I'm doing some Olympic vaulting over these doggy doors. I hear the door swing open. My friend lacks plant, yet has a knife. So I speed up. Old Cuban women are attempting to grab me. They're getting an American 16-year-old stiff arm to the face. I get to the street. He's right on my tail. Book it about 5 more blocks. I see a cop, basically power slide behind him. Look up, I see my friend halfway up the block. Gasps, turns around. Yeah, I made it to base. The Cuban cop said something to me. I don't speak any Spanish. So I just shrugged and walked in the opposite direction. Never saw my friend after that. We had a neighbor who made me feel really uncomfortable. One day he leaned in the doorway of my bedroom and I got an immediate get the F out of here vibe. I turned, walked under the weird loop bridge he was making with his arm, all without responding to him. He asked, where are you going? My family was with his. These families had been friends for about 35 years at this point, and he knew I was alone. I was a 9-year-old boy, he was a 30-year-old man. The second I rounded the corner, I ran out of the house and rejoined the cookout. He was later convicted of molesting his son who was about my age, and I'd already been molested once in my life by someone else, so my mind was like, dude, I can only suppress so much, get the F out of here now. Have a friend that would essentially answer a text message during intercourse. He was that attached to his phone. He didn't get back to me one day, and I noticed his Facebook hadn't been updated yet. I tried hitting him up a few more times, something just didn't feel right. Told a few friends, most wrote it off as nothing because this guy always seems happy. He lives like an hour away, finally I get someone to go with me to hang out with him. Worst case, we'd say we were gonna be in the neighborhood, that's why we were hitting him up. Had we not done that, he was gonna end himself that night. We showed up and he just started crying immediately and saying that he needed help. We outright intervened in a friend's self-slaughter. He was always so active on social media as a way to hide his depression. It chills me to this day that if maybe I don't write him and get a strange odd feeling that a friend might not be here today. My mom and dad had this friend that I hated. I thought he was just creepy and weird, and when I tell them I hated him, they were like, be nice, blah blah blah. Turns out he molested his stepchildren and now he's in jail. I think these unconscious feelings we get are really important and can be extremely beneficial if we learn to listen to them. But we're taught from early on to ignore them and act opposite what they tell us. That's a dangerous game to play. There is such a thing as a feeling of impending doom when your body is like, yo, you're about to die. It's a real thing. I'd not been feeling bad and all of a sudden I sat up and had a distinct feeling of you're going to die soon if you don't do something. I drove myself to the ER and on the way was getting chest pains. I went in, told them, and they took me to the back. After some tests, there were a lot of people around me, injecting me with a lot of different stuff. Turns out I had a pulmonary embolism, blood clot in my lung, which at any second could have gone to my brain and killed me then and there. The doctors said if I had left it any longer, I would have been dead. Thanks, brain. The end of April, my friend and I were to meet up for drinks. He didn't show, didn't answer his phone, didn't respond to my texts. I knew he'd passed away. I got a call the next day. He passed away in a car crash on his way to meet me. I'm sorry you had to go through that. 4 students of mine won the first prize for a project they did and we all got a free trip to London. We'd spent the day sightseeing and were exhausted, so we got an ice cream and sat on a bench in a park to relax. A couple of minutes later, I noticed this couple walk by slowly, staring at us. My spidey senses go mental. I do not like these people for some reason. She walks by and sits on the bench next to ours, and he sits on the bench across from hers. They aren't talking, just looking at each other, and that's when I notice her reaching into her pockets. I jump up, grab my students, and run out of the park. My poor students are confused AF and wondering what is wrong with me, when all of a sudden we hear screaming. Turns out she stabbed a couple walking through the park, trying to rob them. It scares me a lot knowing that, had I not gotten my students out of there, we would have been stabbed and robbed. I worked at a fast food restaurant and I got an antsy phone call from my dad telling me to come home ASAP. There were storms on the way, he was nervous about the timing. I thought I was being paranoid until I got this really uneasy feeling as well. Every nerve in my body was telling me to get home right now. I pissed off the manager when I left without mopping the floors. I rushed home and I had barely gotten into the door for 2 minutes before a tornado hit our house. Looking back on it, if I didn't leave when I did, I would have been driving along the road the tornado followed and I probably wouldn't be here. I got written up at work for leaving without completing my tasks, but a write-up is better than being passed away. Family friend from my uncle's church was on a vacation with us when I was around 11 or 12. I wanted to go for a walk in the woods. My mom said no. He jumped in and insisted he would go with me. She says yes. As we're walking, I'm getting this weird vibe from the guy. He keeps insisting on taking pictures of me. I keep getting more creeped out. Eventually, he's got me cornered and my mind just goes into total fight or flight. He's got his hands on my thighs and there's nowhere I can go, so I'm plotting in my head how I'll launch myself at him and gouge his eyes out. Just as I'm about to make my move, a relative who knew he was a pedo and was worried about what would happen makes his presence known. A few years later, the family friend went to prison for R-ing a bunch of kids, including most of my cousins. I'm pretty sure I was almost R'd that day. Mom sat me down when I was 18, already in tears, proclaiming she had something serious to tell me. Being the sarcastic and nervous F I am, I turned and joked, "What, is dad not my real dad anymore?" Well, folks, really though, does it matter? I mean, my dad is my dad, regardless if he's my genetic dad. It really wouldn't impact me in any way whatsoever. About all I would want to do if I could easily find my real dad, just find out if there was any pre-existing history of illness in my genetics that I should be aware of. I was at my grandparents' for a gathering and me and some of the other older kids were playing catch or tag in the front yard. I can't exactly remember, doesn't matter. The younger kids were playing in the backyard, doing whatever the hell kids do. While playing, I could swear I heard a crying/screaming sound, but it was very quiet and distant. It was one of the most horrific screams I've ever heard, but I asked the others and they didn't hear a thing, and all insisted it was nothing. I don't know why, but felt absolutely dreadful and terrified, yet everything was fine, so I decided to go check it out. I ran into the backyard and it turns out my little sister, 4 to 5 years at the time, was bleeding severely. She was covered in blood and trying to crawl towards the house. I swear it was out of a damn horror movie. Looking back, I can't believe this actually happened. Long story short, my little cousin, 7 to 8 years at the time, decided it was a good idea to play catch with some broken glass she found in the backyard, and ended up cutting her jaw very deeply. Kids are dumb. Years ago, I'm working one morning and my fiancée is off. She texts me around 10 or 11 and she says she'd gone out to breakfast with her family and they bought her flowers and she was having a good morning, blah blah. I was glad to hear that because she didn't really get along well with her family. The more the day went along, the more it all didn't sound right. Later that evening, she was acting unusual and she wouldn't tell me what was going on. So I checked the cell phone account activity and learned not only had she been texting and calling this random guy constantly, but she had been repeatedly lying to me about what she was doing or why she'd go do this and that, or get off the phone with me like to get back to work. There were so many instances where she hung up with me and immediately called him and had lengthy conversations. I then pointed at the flowers that were sitting on my table in my apartment. Really nice flowers, vase with marbles, probably cost $60 easily. I asked if they were from him. They were. That relationship ended right then and there. Once at a party, I was about to kiss this girl, but my spider senses tingled. I took a few steps back and she was like, "What the F?" before throwing up. So glad I dodged that bullet. I used to clean vacant houses for a living. One day I was working at a house near the end of the dead-end street, and there was maybe 6 or 7 houses on the one side of the street before an intersection with a stoplight. So it was a pretty heavy traffic area. I was cleaning out the property just fine when my spidey sense went off the charts. I was inside the house, but I pretty much dropped everything, got in my car and started to drive out of there. On the corner I saw a weird looking guy that had a nasty feeling about him. When I got home it was all over the news. That guy was now known for being a cop killer, making the start of his career right on that street corner about 15 minutes after I hoofed it. Told my boss that I wasn't gonna go back to that property. He understood. I lived in the Middle East for about 9 years. One night I was out with 3 friends of mine and we were hanging out having a smoke out on the street. 2 cars pulled up and about 6 to 7 grown men stepped out of the car rather aggressively right in front of us. As soon as that happened, one of the guys I was with very quickly took off and another guy leaned in, grabbed my shoulder and said, "Your name is Ahmed and you're Muslim." That's when I thought to myself, something is very wrong here. Turned out this was a group of Muslim extremists, and they stood really close to us and started telling us about their brotherhood. The one guy I was with, who was Muslim, did most of the talking until a military truck pulled up, guns drawn, and told them to F off. They then said they were just chatting and causing no problems. Military asked us if we were fine and told us to stay out of this area late at night. I still have the crap stains in my pants even though this happened 10 years ago. A few years ago I was out drinking for a friend's bachelorette party. I knew I was too drunk to drive, so I called my then boyfriend for a ride. As I was hanging up the phone, I thought to myself that I should ask him to drive his car instead of his motorcycle, but I didn't say anything. On the way home, we were sideswiped by a drunk driver in a Suburban. The front wheel of the motorcycle got caught in the wheel well, and she dragged us down the street for about a block and a half. The only reason she stopped was because a cop pulled her over. She was so drunk and she didn't even notice that she ran us over. To add to the trust your gut thing, my boyfriend had only one helmet and I tried to get him to wear it, but he insisted that we weren't going anywhere until I was wearing it. My head hit the pavement pretty hard, but his didn't. If I hadn't been wearing the helmet, things would have gone much differently that night. I was like 6 years old and in the backyard of my best friend/neighbor, swimming in a 3-foot play pool thing. She went inside to ask for something, and right as she left, a guy on a motorcycle drove down the alley and stopped. The fence was a small chain link fence, so he definitely saw me and stopped. And I could see him clearly, like 20 years later it's still so vivid. He pulled out some gloves and put them on, which is the last thing I saw him doing as I got out, and ran through their garage out the front, and inside my house next door, terrified. He drove around the front down the street slowly, and about 10 minutes later shot 2 kids at the park at the end of my street. There was a manager at my job that gave off a pedo vibe for some reason. One day he was arrested at work. I found out he was sexually abusing his granddaughters when I found a victim impact letter from the girl's mom online. It was messed up. I had a coworker who used to go to parties in high school. Several of the parties in her senior year were at some guy's farm. She went to one and bailed right away, saying it felt weird. The guy who owned the farm was Robert Picton. Thank you for watching. If you have stories of your own, feel free to write them in the comments. Like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.